We always thought we were the best band in the world. That's just how Hüsker Dü saw things.
Bob Mould is one of the more influential musicians of the last few decades of American alternative rock. It would be tempting to say on the quiet, but this would be an entirely inaccurate characterization of Bob's music. Bob Mould founded his reputation in the 1980s with Minneapolis three-piece Hüsker Dü, who wedded colossal screaming guitars to sweet pop melodies. They were a key inspiration for Nirvana, among many, many others. Bob's subsequent band Sugar recorded 3 acclaimed albums in the mid-1990s. Since then, he has assembled a solo catalogue which has included several stylistic deviations, but which seems to keep circling back to the power trio format. Bob's latest solo album, which does exactly that, is Here We Go Crazy. Before jumping into our conversation, he'll play us a live version of the album's title track. I'm Andrew Mueller, and I spoke to Bob Mould for the big interview.
Way upon the mountain, trees blowing the breeze, a flag of many colors, stories that we wave, facing down the trail, heading outward to the sea. Well, I'll be floating high above the scenery. Continental patterns, take a token you admire. Drop it in a coin machine, make the gesture smile. Borders fade away, your home is where we stay. Well, sometimes life is only but a dream. Here we go, crazy. Here we go, crazy. Can you take the power? Can you feel it in your soul? Yeah. Airplanes, information, there's a conflict in the sky. Modern constellations, choosing who can live and die. It's always been this way, ancient spirit map our fate. The subliminal astronomy. Here we go, lost on a mountain, no one can find me. Here we go, fall from a tower in the middle of a city. Here we go, I can hear the chatter of a broken boulevard. Here we go, razor blade renegade, cut yourself daily. Not so far away from here, did you see me disappear? In the moment that I'm gone, will the memory live on? Can you feel it in your soul? Can you feel it in your soul? Here we go, crazy, lost on a mountain, no one can find me. Here we go, fall from a tower in the middle of a city. Here we go, I can hear the chatter of a broken boulevard. Here we go, razor blade renegade, cut yourself daily.
Bob Mould, welcome back to Monocle and welcome to the big interview.
Good to be back.
Well, let's start with the new album, Here We Go Crazy, because we will be hearing a couple of tunes from that. It is, I think it's fair to say, it is noisy songs with huge tunes played by a power trio. Is this the environment in which you feel most comfortable?
I think so, yes. I think at this point it's 64 years on this spinning orb. I think that's probably where I should stay for the moment. Yeah, it's a pretty comfortable record, I think. Comfortable for me, familiar for the audience, and it seems appropriate for the times. And that's, as you know, there's always about a year between when I'm recording and when it comes out, and one never can predict the future accurately, but somehow it seems like I landed on a winning formula for this first quarter of 2025.
by which you mean despair.
Well, uncertainty for certain, and dark times, and hopefully, like the record ends, the act 3 of the album, were some kind of hope, some kind of brightness.
I mean, does it feel thematically like a sequel to Blue Hearts, which was kind of a State of the Nation address?
Blue Hearts was a very different animal. That was me trying to channel the energy that I remember from October of 1983 with Hüsker Dü as we were driving down the West Coast heading towards Total Access Studios in Redondo Beach, California to make what became Zen Arcade. And we're in the van conceptualizing this Quadrophenia-esque album, sprawling ideas and, quickly writing words and, 3 years into the Reagan administration and being 22 going on 23, closeted gay man, with the moral majority marginalizing my life. That was what I was trying to channel with Blue Hearts. This record, not so much. This was a more personal endeavor.
I mean, it's not probably the most baneful consequence of the decision your fellow citizens made last November, but how strange would it have been, especially when you think back to that much younger version of yourself, the idea that you could have a vice president of the United States who was a massive Hüsker Dü fan?
Well, I was all for that, and what we're talking about is Tim Walz, who is a Minnesota politician, and I believe Beto O'Rourke, who is a Texas politician and a huge Discord skate punk kind of guy, had posted on social media about he and Tim Walz jogging in the dead of winter in Washington, D.C., and talking about Prince and replacements in Hüsker Dü. And, for that moment, I had so much hope, not because, this guy likes my music, but because the ideas that so many of us have spent our lives sharing with people might have a little bit of agency.
I mean, did it feel like at the time, again, going back to the 1980s, that Hüsker Dü and that peer group to whom you just alluded were the beginning of something new, not just for American music, but perhaps for America more broadly? I
think so. I mean, someone asked me recently, said, did you something about next generation or future generation? And I was like, when Hüsker Dü started, and, I was 18 years old, and I didn't set out to inherit anybody else's generation. The Hüsker Dü, the band, got together, in the wake of, or I guess in the final stages of large arena rock and, jet planes and cocaine and unattainable things. And then when you hear the Ramones or the Sex Pistols or the Buzzcocks, you go, wait, I can do this. So it wasn't so much inheriting, but starting over. I think the idea was to build everything that we eventually had from nothing.
I want to go back to that formative stage of Hüsker Dü because it is something that always interests me about any band that attains any modicum of acclaim or generates any modicum of influence, because most bands don't. 999 out of every 1,000 bands that are formed go absolutely, literally nowhere. Was there a moment at which the three of you realized, whether it was a gig or a rehearsal or one song, that the three of you realized, actually, this might actually be something special? This could work.
I think we knew from the start that it was something, Greg Norton, bass player, Grant Hart, other principal songwriter and drummer of Hüsker Dü, and myself on guitar and principal songwriter. I think between Grant and I, we knew that there was a certain energy, and it took us maybe 18 months, 2 years to sort of harness all of the different ideas. And a lot of that came from playing shows with other bands like the Dead Kennedys or DOA or Poison Idea or Naked Ray Gun. All the different bands that we did shows with in the summer of 81, that, we could hold our own with those bands. And we were influenced by that early hardcore scene in America. And, it just sort of took off from there. And I think the next point was probably the critical acclaim for Zen Arcade in 1984.
There's a specific aspect, though, of Hüsker Dü, which I have always been curious about, because I think personally I probably came to you a little later than that. It would have been around Candy Apple Grey, which for reasons I've never comprehended became one of the records in my year at high school in Sydney. I assume somebody's much cooler older sibling came back from America with it, because you never toured Australia and you weren't on the radio very much. But I can remember me and my friends who were massively getting into music at that point, listening over and over and over to Candy Apple Grey, trying to figure out how anyone makes an electric guitar sound like that. And this is a sound you liken yourself in your memoir, See a Little Light, to somebody revving a chainsaw, which is not an inaccurate description. But was it something you found by accident, or did you have in your head, I want my guitar to make that noise?
That was the equipment I had at the time. I had that Ibanez Rocket Roll Jr. Flying V. I had an Electro Harmonics Mike Matthews Dirt Road Special, a little 1x12 amp. It sounded brittle. And then I had the MXR Distortion Plus, the little yellow box. And I think Ed Cooper from the Saints was the other fellow that was using it at the time.
I can hear that. Well,
you can hear it now.
There's an Australian resonance.
Yes, indeed. So I think the first Ramones album took me away from that sort of bluesy, stonesy, Kiss, Aerosmith kind of, riff rock. And when I heard the Ramones record where the guitar is just isolated on one side and the bass is isolated on the other side, to hear that sound, I was like, right, that should work. And then, hearing, bands like the Buzzcocks where, it was very sort of, short, sharp guitar tones as well. I think those would be the things that got me going.
Hüsker Dü eventually signed to Warner's. For Candy Apple Grey, I think, was the first Warner's record.
Yeah.
Did you allow yourself to dream at that point that we're on our way, this is going to happen, we are going to be possibly at least REM-sized? Because at that point, it's got to seem like it's not impossible, certainly.
Well, I think we knew our stature at that time when we signed with Warner's. We always thought we were the best band in the world. There was no question. There was just no question. After a while, we were just like, no, everyone else is a distant second. That's just how Hüsker Dü saw things. But Warner Brothers, I think, to have those resources available and also the creative freedom that we had at the label, I think we saw bigger possibilities, but I don't think we aspired to being, that 70s bloated airplane cocaine kind of band. We were getting on the radio more. We were on MTV. We were getting afforded a lot of those kind of promotional doodads, the back cover of Billboard magazine, things like that, I think we had hopes, but, truth be told, by the middle of 86, the band was already in trouble, not long after Candy Apple Grey came out.
And was there, when you reflect on it from many decades later, and I speak as somebody who has spent a fair bit of time around bands, and it's genuinely astonishing to me that as many of them stay together for as long as they do, because this is just not a normal way for people to try and live. Is that what basically broke Hüsker Dü up? Was it the same thing that breaks up every other band that breaks up?
Well, I think the umbrella answer for the demise of Hüsker Dü is that the three of us grew apart as people. Greg Norton, the bass player, was the first to move away from the Twin Cities. He moved an hour south, got married, and started having a different kind of life. Got a record store, and Greg enjoyed the country and enjoyed playing golf and doing different things. I recall the summer of 86 is when I, the alcoholic, got sober. I had been drinking every day for 12 years of my life and thought it was best that I just put that down. Grant started drifting in a different direction, with other musicians and other friends. And, I didn't know what that destination was until the very end of the band. So I was a little clueless to where Grant was putting his energy. So that was the summer of 86, and then by the holidays, 87, 88, it was done.
You had done other things by this point, not least your first solo album, Workbook. But question I have to ask, which I will wager you may have heard once or twice before. 3 years later, a power trio from a usually not terribly regarded city in the United States with huge roaring guitars and sweet melodies sell 20 bajillion albums and become the biggest band on earth. How much are you personally gritting your teeth at that moment?
Sugar was never that popular.
You know very well who I'm talking about.
Yeah, all of those guys. Well, I wasn't surprised. You know, a lot of us in the 80s did a lot of building roads. You know, we built highways and, you know, that was just life on the road. A lot of that energy created lanes for groups like the Pixies. Mm-hmm. And eventually, you know, a group like Nirvana, where the summer of 91, I'm doing solo acoustic touring in Europe, you know, on those festivals where Nirvana's trashing everything. You know, I was the guy that was on the short list for producing Nevermind. So I had the demos, so I knew what was going on there. I knew Kurt was a fan from Seattle from shows. I knew Dave was a fan from DC from shows. I was pretty astonished when it all came together so neatly with that group in that moment. I felt like we had won whatever the fight was.
You felt like they were basically on your team.
I think so, yeah. I think so. And, you know, honestly, you know, within a year for me to bring Sugar, the band, to people, you know, it's almost an odd twist. It's maybe if Hüsker Dü paved the roads for Nirvana built the skyscraper, and at least Sugar was able to get halfway up the building to the commissary for lunch.
but was there some frustration attached to it at the time? Because this is, as you say, this is when Copper Blue, Sugar's first album, comes out. It is a tremendous album, and there is no reason at all you would remember this, but Melody Maker sent me to interview Sugar in Cincinnati in, I think, about 1992.
Oh, in the summer.
Yeah.
Before the album was out.
I think so. You were staying at this ludicrous hotel in Cincinnati in this enormous suite you'd been booked into, for which you kept apologizing.
Yes, probably.
Because you kept saying, this is not how I usually stay.
Yeah, typically we're a Premier Inn kind of band.
but Melody Maker inevitably had sent me to, you know, do the Godfather of Grunge story, to interview the revered elder statesman. And the one quote I want to read back to you, because I went and looked it up, was you say, "Come on, man, I'm only 31.
Yeah, I was just doing that math. Yeah, I'm only 31. How can I be a legend? And here we are. Now I'm double that, and I still ask myself, what?
But how, I mean, do you sort of pause from time to time to think about how resonant the legacy, the influence of Hüsker Dü is? Because it surprises even me. I'm thinking, whenever it was, about 10 years ago, I interviewed Colin Malloy from the Decemberists in his home studio in Portland, and I mentioned that he had a Flying V hanging on the wall, and I did say that doesn't strike me as a terribly Decemberists kind of guitar. And he said, no, it's not. He said, I just saw it in a shop, and that's my Hüsker Dü homage.
Oh, that's so sweet. Colin is a great guy. Oh, that's wonderful. But I mean, I'm pretty aware of the work that I've done, both with, you know, Hüsker Dü, Sugar, myself. I am always grateful that my colleagues appreciate the work. I mean, peer review is always, you know, when it's favorable, that's always good. I mean, you know, for instance, on this trip, you know, doing things like performing at Rough Trade Bristol or, you know, Rough Trade Denmark Street, things, you know, where I get to be with people after the show and sign records. And people come up and they always, you know, have the most wonderful things to say and these stories that they share. And, you know, that for me, I'm really thrilled that people trust me with those stories, and you know, they want to sort of show me this is where you entered my life, and that was 40 years ago, and you haven't left. And I mean that, you know, above a lot of, you know, above gold records or fancy this or that. I mean, between my peers and fans sharing their life experience that they've had parallel to my work, that's the good stuff.
There's another part of your career I did want to ask about, because I do weirdly think it kind of has resonance to the times in which we're living. And this is a period during which you end up writing for World Championship Wrestling.
Right.
First of all, how does that even happen?
Well, this happened in the fall of '99 for about 7 months. American Professional Wrestling, I was a fan of it as a kid. I was a student of it as a kid, made friends with people in the business along the way in the 1980s.
You never thought of taking it up, Bob Mould, the Minnesota Mauler?
No, no bumping for me. So in the fall of 99, a friend of mine who was working at World Championship Wrestling, which was the competitor to the WWE, Atlanta-based company, they had a spot opened up on the creative team, and he said, I think I can get you in. I'm like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll give it a try. And just got on a plane and went to Atlanta and got thrown into what they call the war room. And the war room is where everybody sits around the table and writes the stories and pitches ideas, much like any television show. And, I'm sitting in this room, with Kevin Sullivan and Mike Graham and Kevin Nash and Dusty Rhodes, legendary, booker in pro wrestling. And they're just looking at me like, who the hell are you? But then they start asking me things, and then I start, talking about, stuff that happened in Amarillo in 1958. And then they're like, oh, you know the business.
The reason I ask is whether that experience gives you, or whether you think it gives you any particular insight into what American politics has become, because it's not an original observation what Donald Trump has learnt from professional wrestling, in which he has had one or two actual cameo appearances. But do you see something there in the way he has framed his own appeal to his own fans? Is it the same sort of dynamic?
Yeah. So the premise with professional wrestling is everything you see is real. Perception is reality. So it's all an illusion. It's all misdirection. But what the goal is what we're doing is what you will believe, whether it's true or not. Trump hosted a couple WrestleManias when he had Trump Taj Mahal or Trump Plaza down in Atlantic City. And then I think he was involved in a main event of a WrestleMania where it was hair versus hair against Vince McMahon, where they each had wrestlers that were fighting. And I think Trump shaved Vince's head. So he's been around it. Linda McMahon, who's the, education secretary now, or the head of department.
Indeed so.
The destruction of education department, I think he's learned a lot from professional wrestling. And I think it's that illusion and, that misdirection. When he first showed up in earnest trying to be president for 2016, I just looked at it and I'm like, this is all pro wrestling. He's cutting pro wrestling promos.
Yeah, but are you concerned, especially now, given that this second term is clearly going to be a much more amplified version of the first term, of what might happen when, I guess, the people who've been cheering him on leave the arena and realize, oh, okay, this is actually real? Yeah,
I mean, it's a great concern. I think now they've dialed in those components of pro wrestling, whether it's the lewd behavior, the foul language, the pyro and ballyhoo, they've incorporated all of that. They've brought Dana White, who runs UFC, in. And when you bring these folks in and you go for that 18 to 35 young male who's somewhat disenfranchised, somewhat undereducated, somewhat underemployed, definitely not dating or married, a lot of hostility, perhaps still living with their parents. Yeah, all of the messaging is aimed at them, and it resonates, and it's terribly frightening.
But are there things that you're, I guess, especially concerned about, worries about gains that have been made in the United States in your lifetime being rolled backwards? I mean, you spoke earlier about having been a closeted gay man when Hüsker Dü began. If memory serves, you were actually outed in the 1990s when that was a thing people were still doing?
1994, Spin Magazine came to me and said, we'd like to do a big feature on you. We'd like to talk about your sexuality. We could... it wasn't so much we could do this the easy way or we could do this the hard way, but it was sort of implicit. It was part of the bargain.
But this is only 30 years ago, and the insinuation there is that there's something controversial or indeed even interesting about this.
Yeah, and this is going from the summer of '81 when HIV/AIDS was identified to, 1994, 13 years, there wasn't a ton of progress made. I mean, ACT UP and activism in the late 80s made lots of progress, leaning in on Tony Fauci and NIH and, let's spend some money to try to solve this. It got a little better, but yeah, I mean, 1994, it was like, yeah, I guess I should talk about what everybody probably already knows. Fast forwarding 31 years now, this is a whole different animal. 1994 was the very beginnings of the internet, the very beginnings of AOL and Netscape and all these, ancient, social media precursors. The concern now is, in the 80s and 90s, it was broadcasting, right? We would tell people, we would share information with people. Now, when you give up the microphone, anytime you give up a microphone, you're taking a chance. When you give up the town square soapbox, you're really taking a chance. And now when you give up, you give up the political platforms of America to people who aren't fit to lead a country and people who, more importantly, were not elected to be the department of anything. Now we're looking at a situation where my rights are in danger, trans youth, trans families. This is just horrifying what they're doing. The dismantling of America, selling off the parts, dismantling law, defying justice. People who don't have millions and millions of dollars, they only have law and justice as a means to protect themselves. And this is being taken away. So I hope for people, if anyone in America listens to this, it's coming to your house as well. And it doesn't matter how you voted. You will feel this very shortly.
We are regrettably coming to the end of our time. We should try and close on an at least somewhat upbeat note, I guess.
Right, yes.
Just, again, going back to the Hüsker Dü just beginning, circa Zen Arcade, and Lord help us all, that was 41 years. 41 years, is it?
Yes,
It must be.
yes.
But the album you have just made, which is... It's not a distant relation to Zen Arcade, and for what it may be worth, I think it's one of the best records you've ever made.
Oh, thank you.
If you think back to that kid making Zen Arcade, would the idea to him of a 64-year-old you still sounding like this have surprised him?
No. Why is this guy not gone? But, for anybody who's 23 that wants to try to take me out, I'm standing right here.
Bob Mould, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of The Big Interview. It was produced by Gunnar Gronlid and edited by Jack Dewars. From me, Andrew Mueller, thank you very much for listening. Bob Mould is on tour for quite a lot of this year. Dates at bobmould.com. And playing us out live in our studio, this is Bob with another track from his new album, Here We Go Crazy. This is When Your Heart Is Broken.
When your heart is broken, you won't know which way to turn. Watch it burn, watch it blaze, glowing embers, endless days. When your heart is broken, you can't find the breath to speak. Toss and turn, restless nights, wipe those teardrops from your eyes. I'm so tired, I barely make it to my bed. Well, now I stay inside. These empty moments fill my head with grief. When your heart is broken, you feel danger in the breeze. Every movement breaks the spell. Run like children, run like hell. And when your heart is broken, misery you can't believe. Lovers burned, it's time to leave, never to return. Oh yeah. And when your heart is broken, and when your heart is broken, and when your heart is broken, and when your heart is someday I will be around. Remember your old hometown, the places you used to play. You needed a place to stay, but you couldn't settle down. You had to repaint the town, the friends that you left behind, vanishing from your mind. When your heart is broken.